Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome all of you to our closing session here. I'm very pleased to have all the chairs of the previous sessions here with us on the stage, and I've actually asked each of them to prepare a little summary. So they will all walk us through one or two slides and sort of brief us on the main challenges and opportunities, but also about the innovative solutions that came up within their respective sessions. But before we go into those sessions, I wanted to sort of very quickly use the opportunity to zoom out a little bit and just go a few years back and highlight the tremendous transformation actually the Asia and Pacific region has already gone through, and this is truly amazing. And I would like to start with a little test. In 1990, how many people, what was the percentage of people in the Asia-Pacific region which lived in extreme poverty? So extreme poverty was defined then living on less than $1.50 per day. Has anyone in the audience an idea how many people in 1990 in the entire Asia-Pacific region, how many people lived below the poverty line in percent? Anyone an idea? 40%? Anyone else? Come on, don't be shy, just shout something. 60, 30? Okay, it was 53%. An amazing, less than 30 years ago, an amazing 53%, more than half of the people in Asia Pacific lived in extreme poverty, not just poverty, extreme poverty, so less than $1.50 per day. Today, or in 2013, that was the last figure I found, it was less than 9%. Now it's probably lower. So the region has really made a tremendous progress, right? It is now the fastest growing region. 33% of the global GDP is currently produced in Asia Pacific, and the region is actually expected to account for more than half of the global production in 2050. So it is the most dynamic region. Of course, this success story comes with a number of issues, right? So we face issues with sustainable and inclusive growth, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. We face issues of climate change. We have widespread environmental degradation, and air pollution, for example, is one of the key issues in many of the Asia-Pacific cities, such as Bangkok. Same goes for resource consumption. Obviously, that economic growth and that poverty reduction comes with a price, because we have a very linear economic model which really relies on extracting resources, using them, not very efficiently, and then discarding them. I give you another figure now, I won't ask you about it, but 63% of all global material use, 2/3, happening in the Asia-Pacific region. So 2/3 of all material, fossil fuel, bio, minerals, metals are used annually in the Asia-Pacific region. So as you can see, this region has a huge hunger of resources. So the key question now I have for the panel, once you go through your different sections, be it policy or financing or business, how do we actually achieve and maintain economic growth, which continues to improve the standards of living of the people and also helps us to get rid of that remaining 9% of extreme poverty, but at the same time we have to maintain sustainable levels of resource use, which do not have a negative impact on our environment, right? So how do we actually define well-being and a good lifestyle? We had like a session in the very beginning during the ASEAN event where we talked about less is more. So what does it mean? How can we achieve a sustainable and a good lifestyle, which is fully sustainable, while we are not depleting the natural resources? So I would like to just put that out in terms of guiding questions. And I would like to now invite Hong Sing to present the first slide, or the first two slides, the summary of her session, and maybe I ask one or two questions and then we go through and everyone will get the chance to present. We need the clicker. Okay, sorry. Thanks. Just a slide, just a reminder. Whenever you have a question, please log in already in Slido under Go Green. And throughout the session, if you have any questions, just post them. So right after we are through with the presentations, I look at those questions and we'll have a chance to interact. Thank you.
Okay, so the working crew will put on the slides, right? Oh. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Dirk for this whole entire introduction, and it's also shocking to learn, pardon my ignorance again, you know, that 1990 is what, 53%, and now is 9%? Yeah, there's a good progress. At the same time, like what you say, we have also a lot of other issues. So in my context, being the session chair for plenary 1, rules of the game, I was just reading one of the article where we talk about, you know, this whole conversation on rules and policies is always complex matters. And whether, you know, at the end of the day to have the community, the government to actually exercise such rules or not, it takes a lot of work. And it is not just, you know, iron fist and forcing it down, but also the whole entire effort of enrolling the community or the people into act. And, you know, the very key thing is if this whole conversation on public policy can be tackled in environment issues, or, you know, then businesses and households will become a lot more efficient, a lot more feasible, and in your conversation of, you know, improving poverty, at the same time can address also the context of low carbon economy. So my session from China, Dr. Shi Feng talks about the master policy when, you know, he addressed on this whole conversation on ecology, environment. China being China, they are out there in the market practically everywhere in the world. They have a lot of presence and they're growing, they're not stopping. But at the same time, the government are also paying a lot of attention in terms of how they are, you know, impacting the world or affecting the world with the kind of work that they're doing, and therefore they know that in order to do business or in order to spread their wings out to serve the world, they have to do something about this whole context of low carbon emission. So in the challenge part is where when the country is so big and they are going out of the country, they have to pay attention to a lot of aspects in order to garner also respect from the world for them to be able to have business transaction. On the opportunity side, of course, it opens up a whole brand new market. Of course, you know, now they are targeting like happier people, happier environment. You know, when the environment is better, they can breathe better air. They are definitely much, you know, enjoyable. And of course, raising awareness to go eco-civilization is no longer a choice, as what Dr. Shi Feng has said. You know, he even have to go to the rural area to get some work done. So when it comes to the conversation of such a huge project by China, India have also the conversation of what it takes to have a sustainable procurement systems. So the government themselves knows that, you know, their systems are decentralized, the efficiency is not really there, and you know, they have to actually do a lot of work to enroll the market, to accept the change of policy when they decided to go onto this whole entire initiative. So right from the very start is that they address the simpler needs, the basic needs of what India government is procuring, like, for example, stationaries. So it doesn't stir, you know, challenges to the people that's working in the group. And the beauty part is also that, they care so much about what the people think. They have established a task force to serve that particular conversation and also to set the standards by driving the conversation of sharing economy. And then come the conversation of like Sri Lanka, Mr. Sasi Session, where I'm super impressed with the work that he do, in a sense of like, as a startup, he himself faces the problem and he raised the problem. The thinking of, if he faces it, maybe somebody else also faces it. He owns a tuk-tuk, which is a traditional engine tuk-tuk. For him to overhaul the whole entire tuk-tuk into electric tuk-tuk takes a whole lot of money, and also the taxation is extremely, extremely high. And for probably a commoner who owns a tuk-tuk, for them to be able to transform that tuk-tuk to e-tuk-tuk, there is no way. So with that said, it opens up a big opportunity where the government start to listen in and say, okay, so there is this issue, and they want to be seen as also doing their bit in the low carbon emission the subject. Therefore, they also start to open up to say, okay, what are the concerns, what are the issues? So in short, it is a conversation of government wanting to set the rules and policy, and at the same time, they listen in to the people who is actually benefiting from that rules. By the change of that rules or by the adjustment of the work, it actually benefit the commoners who is actually riding on this tuk-tuk or using the tuk-tuk as a means of service or to provide service. And also the other interesting part is it actually also offers like better tariff to recharge at off-peak hours for the electric tuk-tuk. So coming down from Sri Lanka, the big challenge is there's no standards, or there's standards, but standards are just emerging from the angle of lighting, the LED lighting. And with that said, there was also a very good statistic offered by Kun Willapon. And he actually shared that he completed 8 drafts, but none were published. I'm really curious, why was it not published? So I'm basically going to pursue and find out more from him, because these are big efforts that policies are established and not published. They got to have a reason. Of course, the control of quality or standards yet attained. It's like, when let's say somebody set the product out to test, it is accepted, but subsequently when they deliver the product, is the product of that same quality and that same standard? So that is a very big question mark, where it sets out this whole big question mark of challenges. Then obviously when there is a challenge, it also opens up opportunity. So when we look at opportunity, he's suggesting things like holistic approach for standard and keeping it simple to apply. Price standardization, in fact, that has been a subject that pretty close to my mind, probably a decade back, when I established one of the non-profit organization. If today ASEAN or AP were to combine their requirement, probably they can do a very good negotiation with the supplier, where price could be driven down and also feedback could be given to the supplier. So the price standardization aspect, I think it is a huge opportunity for a lot of suppliers if they care enough to do something about it. And innovative solution, specifically, as I mentioned, Thailand, I'm going to go from the bottoms up from the slide. Thailand, when we talk about pricing standardization, it's going to benefit many, whether if you are the super rich or you are not so super rich. And, but more importantly is there is that consistency of standards being maintained to serve the purpose of the low carbon emission direction. And for Sri Lanka, the innovative solution, I think there's a lot of intention of Mr. Sasi who wanted to do, whether if it's also going to move on to the conversation of collecting a lot of data to serve the Sri Lankans. But the key thing is the government were willing to take feedback, to improvise on the system, and also convert the old tuk-tuk. Hopefully, the next time when you go to Sri Lanka, lesser carbon emission, then you can feedback to Mr. Sasi also. When you see that more e-tuk-tuk is on the road. And of course, with that said, with all the incentive offered, they are basically hoping to drive towards a better livelihood. India's system, a centralized system, is what they are working towards for electronic procurement. And any shareable initiative basically helps to drive sustainability, especially with PM Modi having the vision and intention of building 100 smart cities. These would also help towards that kind of efficiency in terms of smart city development. And China, Road and Belt Initiative, I'm actually very glad as a Chinese that he is also doing a lot of, the Chinese government are doing their bit to actually improvise the system, not just by talking, but having a central system to collect as much data as possible, and then they can analyze it to be able to give the feedback respectively to the region that they are developing. Quoting a quick recap on on what Dr. Shifeng says, when they were doing the work in Laos, they even have to go to Laos to spot check the factory to make sure that this factory who claim to meet a certain standard really comply to those standards. So I'm pretty impressed with the work. I'm done, sir.
Thank you so much. A very quick sort of follow-up question on your presentation, because you presented, also the views of the private sector, obviously, in your panel, right? And we had, offline a lot of discussions already about, creating the right link between, private sector and policymakers and the other way around, because it needs to be a two-way conversation, to establish those the right policies which, support a low consumption, a low carbon consumption. So what would be your sort of idea on how to improve that dialogue and the flow of information between, the private sector players and the policymakers?
I think the very key thing is the policy makers are just policy makers. The private sectors, they have many, in fact, many a times for me is I hear from the private sectors that, where private sector as in also the individual or the private sector in business, that the government is doing this, but life goes on. But you see, I see the change in the private sectors is when the private sectors feel the needs to make that change and drive that change and work towards, together with the government. You need to have the two hands together. It can't be just one-sided. As much as just like morning when there is this whole fantastic conversation on blockchain, but if the government have not accepted for whatever the reason is, the very key thing is, are the policymaker very, educated enough, or are they aware what is happening on the ground for the ground to also be able to feed back to the government, right? So then it can work. It can never be a one-way street. We are living in a community. We're not living alone. There is no way that anybody can operate by themselves, and particularly the conversation of why are we, dividing so specifically clear, this is your job, this is my job. But if we can combine that effort, I think we can get better results. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, Stephen, we need money. We need a lot of money, right, to finance low carbon in sustainable development. So please tell us, how do we get it?
I'm tempted to say, you shall have money. I think if you have a good idea, the money will come. We talked about that yesterday on the panel, and Hong-Sin, you were on the panel, and you actually do crowdfunding. Money is always looking for good ideas, because good ideas are going to punch through. That was one of the main touch points yesterday. And I have a couple others on the next slide, but before I go there, I just want to say two things. One is, first of all, I want to compliment the organizers of the event, because the panel yesterday was outstanding. The people that you got to come, so Isabel and Janet and Mushtaq, who are here in the crowd, and our colleagues at CASIAN, really hats off, because wonderful event, wonderful speakers, and really rich. And I think also the conversation around behavioral insights, Sidia, that you managed today, I found really, really interesting. And they all link together. That's the interesting thing. So the money. Can we have slides on money, please? Oh, I have to click. Okay. The money doesn't come unless you press the button.
Do something for it.
Yeah, you have to do something. Okay, so Dirk asked me to put together 5 take-home points, and it wasn't easy because it was a really rich and sort of varying landscape conversation. So I wanted to try to distill some of the points, and maybe we didn't catch everything, but here's a few take-home points. The first is Kalina's point from the World Bank, from the IFC, where she says there's a lack of awareness. And so I do teaching, I create markets. There's a lack of awareness about green financing instruments and the opportunities, and that's slowing the uptake. So let's break down the communications barrier. And that also goes to the conversation about behavioral insights. A second major message was missing markets. Anyone who studied economics knows that missing markets is a major theme, because you won't get a price instrument unless the market is there. And the market won't be there unless the governance is there to create the market. The governance are the institutions that set the rules of the game. That was your entire conversation. So governments have a critical role in setting up those markets for predictability, so the private sector isn't caught off guard, so their investments are not going down the wrong tube, but also so that they know that the markets are addressing environmental challenges. That will be critical to getting the money to flow. So that's a message for policymakers. Third, uncertain profitability. I think it was Angela who made this point yesterday. We're not sure that the consumer's with us. We're not sure the consumer is yet willing to pay. And if the consumer's not there, the revenue stream isn't there. So that was the fourth one. Again, goes to the behavioral insights as well. The fourth and the fifth are kind of interesting. The fourth is alternative finance. We saw in the video $245 billion last year. That's alternative finance. I'm not sure if that includes green bonds. I don't think it does, because green bonds was 150, 200 billion. So really large amounts of capital that are moving, and this can flatten finance, to borrow a term from Thomas Friedman about flattening the world with globalization. And here's a little hook, that can complement traditional finance, and beware, keep yourselves on your toes, that could also substitute traditional finance. I think that's a little bit of a wake-up call. And the fifth point is disruptive technology is evolving very, very quickly, and it's evolving faster than policy responses. And that can be good, as we saw with our startups, and there's some startups in the crowd that are making things happen, but policymakers need to catch up. They need to be on their toes, because otherwise the market will pass them by, the impact may be unintended, and we might see things that we didn't expect. So that's an interesting thing that you can all comment on. Okay, the second slide is on innovations. Oh, that's me again. Here we go. So these are the messages. These are sort of the upside messages that we would be taking forward from this conference into, I understand, this Singapore ministerial that Singapore is organizing with UN Environment and all the regional environment ministries, and also eventually the UN Environment Assembly. So 5 points again. The first is linking finance and investment targets to the goals. You know which goals I'm talking about, right? The 17 goals, the global goals, the sustainable development goals. Because if we don't have a link, it doesn't make sense. It goes back to the purpose. I think it was Jacob that was telling us about the purpose and the importance of purpose. The purpose is sustainability. The goals are universal. The goals are immediate. Second point is fiscal incentives. Be aware that tax arrangements might be needed for, let's say, softening the curve or bending the curve to make these investments more interesting. More clarity is needed on guidelines, particularly when it comes to things like green bonds. What are green bonds? What makes a bond green? Why should I invest in a green bond? We need more information. It really is kind of a gray area, if not a green area. So then the fourth and fifth, these are the last ones. I think this is your point, Hong-Sin. Know your customer. So we need to be able to compete on the same playing field as traditional finance. We need to have access to data and the same kind of information that the traditional financing and banking sector works on. I'm not sure if I captured that 100%, but yeah, it's okay. Okay, the last one. This sort of goes back to the second one as well, which is about seed money. Seed money for blended finance, blended capital. How do you, again, bend the curve? I'm going to be a little polemical here. This is somewhat self-serving, even though it's a message from our panel. But our panel had a venture capitalist and they had a crowdfunder who's here next to me. So capital is designed to take risks. Risk and return are related. If there isn't a high risk, you wouldn't expect a high return, and sometimes you're going to lose. So the question is, for example, in renewables, there were huge government incentives, and that helped push the technology over the curve and brought down the cost. Question is, does that same principle apply to green finance and other areas? And I leave that, Dirk, with you.
Thank you, Stephen. Very, very interesting summary of your panel discussion yesterday. Quick question from my side. I mean, we heard yesterday from, I think it was Angela, when she talked about, that there's actually a market for some sustainable products, right? But it's usually a niche market. It's a luxury market. So what can policymakers do to bring those products into the mainstream?
That's very interesting. It's sort of the missing markets question. And I think there's two things. One is, we need more information. Labeling is huge because people actually do care about what they eat and what they drink. And what I've heard in the past 2 days about blockchain technology, for example, and the Internet of Things, makes me optimistic because that could be a huge leveler for transparency. But I think governments need to get with it and open the dialogue with the private sector to say, this is an opportunity. It's not a threat. It's an opportunity for the kind of market you want to create. And the second thing is really along the lines of the panel on behavioral insights again, because to me, consumers will not wake up until they're presented with a frame that makes it easier to make the decisions that they need to make. So all this about nudging and framing and defaults is tremendously important. And for me, governments sort of need to get with that program as well. That's a huge area where we can improve. And just to end on a thought for you and environment, for us, sustainable lifestyles is a huge area of innovation because lifestyles are the precursor to demand. And so you can we live in demand-led economies. We always hear that. We live in demand-led growth. That's all driven by lifestyles. So that's the area to focus on.
Thank you, Stephen. Edwin, you are standing in for Jessica. I think she had to leave home early. Yeah. So we have recruited one of her panelists to report back. You participated in session 3 on business action for cleaning up consumption. So please, the floor is yours.
Sure. First, let me apologize to all of you who came out here to listen to Jessica. Sorry to disappoint you that you have to make do with me. So I was a panel on this morning's session, which essentially we talked about how businesses can contribute, towards, for example, sustainable consumption and innovation. So, for example, Mobike, it's a pretty good example of how a company, has grown based on a sharing economy model. But they didn't just stop there. I mean, they continued to innovate, and I think Sharon was sharing that they even had to, or that they even reinvented the wheel on their wheel. So, you know, it's a good example of how you can thrive in a sharing economy. Technology, of course, is quite central these days. So is the availability of data. But just for myself, coming from the food industry, I think it's also quite a good time for the industry to come together on a pre-comparative collaboration basis. So we should look beyond, if you would, borders within your own industry, because the problem, for example, of plastics is not just going to impact one company, it's going to impact the whole industry. So I think it makes sense for the industry to come together. And also, again, within the entire value chain. So don't just work within the food companies, you work with, for example, technology companies, you work with the packaging companies, and maybe even the recycling companies, so that you can have an end-to-end development of packaging. And then we look at policy tools, which is one of my favorites, and I'm glad to hear that it's gotten a lot of airtime in this forum. I think that's really an important lever that should be used. And I think Stephen mentioned that sometimes you know, policy innovation hasn't quite caught up with private sector innovation. So it's a good time where all of us here should collectively start to nudge some of our policymakers to say, hey, you know, let's get with the game and let's work together to see how we can move things along. Oops, sorry. So I think, again, public-private partnerships is quite crucial. I'm going to have something to say on this maybe later, so I'm not going to jump ahead of myself. But I think, again, in this day and age, you can't run away from people working together and not setting policies in a silo, or for companies just going ahead and doing stuff without you know, policies and standards to guide them. E-commerce is one area where, you know, perhaps a light touch from policy makers has helped e-commerce to flourish. And again, in Singapore's example, for example, you look at ride sharing. Previously we had Uber, and then now we have Grab. That has really grown in leaps and bounds in just the last 24 months, because I think the policymakers in Singapore adopted a light touch. They had some basic standards and rules, but they allowed the companies to operate. And along the way, you start to revise and review the policies to enable people to move. And then I think, yeah, so circular economy models, we've talked a lot about it. But again, I think in some ways we should need to learn to get to the consumers in a more easy to understand language, because it's all nice and fine for us to say circular economy, sustainability, but if I go into a supermarket and I don't attend this conference, I don't know how to tell the difference between what's sustainable or what's organic or what's healthy. And every product comes with 10 different labels, you know, and different measurements. So per serving of 100 grams contains 2 grams of sugar, that one per serving of whatever comes in. So there's no standardization, and it's quite easy to get confused, and then therefore you get tuned out as a consumer. So I think those were essentially the key points from my session that we had this morning.
Thank you so much. Also very interesting. You talked a lot about, you know, the plastic value chain, and that's obviously very important for the food industry. And you talked also about the importance of public and private partnerships. Can you give us an example? Are there already good public-private partnerships, sort of which address circularity in the food packaging sector? Is there anything you could share with us?
I guess I have no choice but to jump ahead of what I was planning to say. So I think, you know, in terms of public projects, you have the PPP model, right? Most of us are familiar with it. So we should then look at the PPP model when it comes to policy development. And the PPP refers to the private, the public, and the people sector. And the people sector meaning the NGOs, international organizations. Because again, there has to be a proper integration of policy development, both from the drafting stage to the implementation stage. And I can only speak for Singapore because I'm from there and I'm familiar, and I was a public servant before. So in the area of packaging, for example, we have something, a loose model, we call it the Singapore Packaging Agreement. Basically, it's all the companies, the brand owners, we've got the private sector, the public sector. So we sit together, and every year we review and we look at the measurements of how much plastics we need to cut down. We set a target. And so from there, we are moving towards mandatory reporting in 2020. And I think that's a precursor to the introduction of EPR. So the good thing is that it allows a phased-in approach, which I think industry appreciates. The last thing you want is for a government in 2 weeks to implement a policy and everyone's like, So I think the phase-in approach is probably a good approach, but it's only going to be a good approach if it involves the stakeholders in the development of that policy, the implementation. And it must come with the proper use of data and matrix, to allow for a more objective, quantitative look at things.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to the next session, session 4, which was on disruptive technology innovations for low carbon consumption. Louis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Could I ask you to move your nice shoes a bit? It is quite important just to give a bit of a context to when we talk about consumption and lifestyles. Sometimes we place it as if this is just a bunch of people that can make any decision they want and follow it through, and that is just a matter of that willpower or that decision. There are two things that are quite important here. One, the context within which consumption takes place and how people go about their everyday living. And in this case, it is very important to recognize the role of systems of provision, of hardware, and of policy in guiding choice and in guiding decisions that people make every day. The architecture upon which we depend for everyday living is quite important. This is where technology is very useful. The second one is that nobody gets up on a given day saying, I'm going to go out and harm the environment. People get up every day because they want to see their friends, they want to sit with family, they want to talk to each other, they want to talk to their neighbors and celebrate. They don't go out saying, I'm going to buy this piece of technology or I'm going to harm the environment. Now, with this in mind, now that you know a bit of my biases, I'd like to discuss a bit of how the session went. That was just a few hours ago. And if I get it wrong, any of the panelists, you're free to come up here and hit me in the head. That's fine. The first one is the need for technology to be, there's an increasing, and now that I'm talking about challenges, there's an increasing concern that there might be too much of technology around things which are a little bit more traditional and everyday living. And it is a question of whether this technology is in itself useful, playing a function that supports our well-being, or it is just there for the sake of it. The second one is the issue of democratic participation in the use and application of these technologies. Do people have the right capacity to function with this technology, or it's just railroading them along? Are people technologically literate to be able to use it? And does it give advantage to some rich people over some poor people, such that only those that can afford it end up having a better quality of life, and it becomes an opportunity to repress or suppress other people? Then the next one, since we're talking about sustainability, is the environmental soundness of the technology. Does it overall reduce the environmental burden? And there's a concept that might be a bit more familiar with maybe policymakers and researchers, the idea of rebound effects, the idea that sometimes the technology becomes so good and so sweet that we end up using it so much and we overdo things with it, and the negative consequences override the benefits of it. So it's important for technology to be very careful about this. And it's one of the gaps we need to make sure happens is that we don't come up with technology that only very wealthy transnational corporations can afford. It's important for SMEs, for mom and pop shops and other small size operations to be able to have access to this technology and to participate in the broader market. And now to a few innovative solutions, and you heard the panelists, so this is probably not a very fair representation of everything that was discussed. But part of what really impressed me was the opportunity for participation that is offered by technology, peer-to-peer technology. We heard Latika, for example, talk about this in the context of the blockchain. And this idea, this participatory approach is quite important, and it's quite important that we encourage this kind of element in more and more technology that is being developed. The next one is that quite a lot of the technology that was presented here, and thankfully this is a sustainability forum, it was a kind of technology that is not in front of people. It's what drives things in the background. We heard about MIT labs, and some of the systems that they're bringing in place, it's just making it easy for people to find parking or to reduce parking. It's making everyday systems a little bit easier rather than being something that is standing there in front of people and selling itself. The next one is that we had an example of a really beautiful human-centered and technology that is harmonious with nature. Manish talked about the work he is doing with Coolant, with his colleagues at Coolant, looking at cooling systems that are looking back at more traditional systems and seeing how we can bring that into the future with us, replacing more consumptive technologies such as air conditioning. And it's an example which I think is, as we need more and more cooling, hopefully things don't get warmer than they are already, but as we need more and more cooling, we're going to need these kind of technologies that work with nature rather than adding to the problem. And we also had few examples from Tim and Latika again, talking about using the blockchain for purposes of transparency and accountability, which is something we would need more and more of in the future as value chains become very complex, as systems of provision become very complex, and to avoid the risk of people feeling confounded by a system like this. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I also thought it was a fantastic session. I'm personally a great fan of all types of technologies and gadgets and stuff, but my question would be to you, you know, taking into account that we are fairly close to the 2030 sort of mark of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are having real issues to getting sort of global warming under control, so you know the emissions reductions and so on and so forth by the countries is not enough. We even have reports from our International Climate Panel which predicts that we may not stay within 2 degrees, it might be 2.5 or even 3 degrees. We have a growing middle class and consumption in Asia Pacific and elsewhere. So my question would be, do you think that those technologies you've just elaborated on, be it blockchain or artificial intelligence, will they be scalable and will they have an early enough impact to sort of help us to turn things around and to come back to a pathway of sustainability, or will it simply take too long?
Wow. If I answer this question right, I need $1 million from you. So and I'm not going to get it right. So
let's see.
The quick answer is no. Here's, however, where I hesitate to, if I'm not sitting in a forum like this, I would not give this answer. Where I hesitate, however, is that we seem to have two camps. The camp that says, oh, technology is bad, don't get there. And the camp that says, oh, technology is the solution, let's put all our energy into it. And this is entirely wrong. We have an issue here with a system that is so dynamic that no one understands all the ins and the outs of it. And so what is becoming very clear is that technology obviously plays a role, and a very strong role. What we are worried about is whether technology is evolving or is developing at a pace which we can catch up with, and where we can put enough guidelines to make sure that it doesn't start creating a problem of its own, but it's rather within the realm of solutions that we're looking for. And if we can manage to harness this very well and to allow for quick deployment of what we already know, then we stand a very good chance of at least limiting the extent to which the temperature rise could get to runaway levels.
Thanks. Last but not least, Divya. Culture, psychology, behavior, economics. Tell us more. How can we all be nudged towards being more sustainable?
Thank you, Dirk. I thought for once I would get away by being in the chair and just, questioning my panelists, but Dirk's made sure that I'm on this side of the table again. So let me first apologize to my panelists in advance because I've sort of put this together really quickly after the end of this last session, and I'm sure I haven't done justice to the sort of richness of discussion that happened in that session. On the key challenges, which are also in some sense opportunities for us, the first one, which was really the premise of the discussion, was that people make decisions using their intuitive and automatic responses and not just sort of, putting their entire cognitive ability to bear on a problem always. And this both raises a challenge, but also offers several opportunities in the kinds of interventions and nudges that can be designed, and I'll come back to that in the next slide, in influencing behavior. We heard that, to be able to make significant changes, we have to work on social norms and on what is considered good or acceptable social norms in a society. But this often requires sustained campaigns, sustained interventions by policymakers and, by extension, big budgets. But we also heard in the previous session that if you have a good idea, the money will flow. So, when I sort of started out with this, I thought that money may be a constraint, but as we discussed, we did realize that there were innovative ways of finding the money to, sustain such kind of initiatives. And the third point, which, came out in different ways in the session, was that the economics still matters. So we could work, and I'll come back to this point in the next slide. So we could work on, what's driving behaviors at a subconscious level. But even there, I think, when it comes to final decisions in the market, the kinds of economic incentives that people face do matter significantly in the decisions they make. And therefore, it's important to sort of integrate the economics even in the work or the interventions on the behavior side. Sorry. Okay. On the innovative solution, the one message that came out very clearly was the need to target the audience and be clear about what you expect to change. I mean, you can't set about changing the whole world or changing the entire population to, towards a certain direction. You have to know who are the big consumers, who are the big energy consumers, who are the low energy consumers, and what is it that you want to change in their behavior. So that kind of information and targeting is absolutely essential. Information and provision of information in itself and for itself is important. And we spoke about both, nudging people towards more sustainable choices using information. Information about how their own energy consumption, for instance, compares with the energy consumption of their peers. Or about, if you look at it from the point of view of industry, then what is the kind of waste or toxic waste that is being generated by industry? Because nobody wants to be the bad guy. And if you sort of see yourself as standing outside of what is considered a good practice, then you will want to, at some level, align yourself with what is accepted. So information is key. Data, evidence, and insights-driven communication. So this was an important issue that came out that, you have to, don't undermine the intelligence of your audience, give them the facts, there is something in economics which you call the altruistic effect. So even if it doesn't affect you, but if you have the facts of a situation, even if it affects somebody else, but it is something of concern, you'll want to take action. So providing enough evidence and data, and this also refers to the point that Alex was making on the whole issue of, say, how a policy context is framed or how default options are designed. There is now enough evidence that these work. So using this evidence and insight to prepare communication is essential. But at the same time, it's also important to make this communication relatable to people's sensibilities, and to use the word that was used in the session, to make it sexy and appealing for people. And the example that, which was given, I think, by Jacob was that, when ivory use in China was being targeted, just the image of an elephant or a threatened elephant or an endangered elephant did not help until the elephant was colored black and white in the colors of an animal that the Chinese could relate to, the panda. So making the information relatable to people is absolutely essential. I come back to the issue of economics being important, and this also was raised by Stig, where he sort of highlighted that in Norway the main reason why electric vehicles are popular is, yes, partly because of their environmental impacts, but largely because they make economic sense to people. And I think this is a very important point, which also extends to other aspects such as conservation decisions, for instance. And we in India, for instance, grapple a lot with this issue when it comes to conservation of forests. There are some states in India which have, geographically, they are endowed with rich forests, but they want some sort of payment, some sort of compensation for ecological services for them to hold on to those forests and not change the land use to some more sort of economically profitable land use. So, while there is a strong case for the carbon benefits, the GHG benefits, the ecological services, but these in themselves will not work till these are monetized and, in some sense brought into that, call it a market transaction, or at least sort of, ensure that the states which are conserving or the entities that are conserving have some sort of a return, a monetary return for the conservation. So both at the individual level as well as I think at the unit of planning and at the governance level, there is a case to be made for why economics still remains important if you want to push people towards sustainability. And finally, an issue again which underlies a lot of the interventions and a lot of discussion that took place was appeal to the emotions of people. And this is where again Stig raised the issue of recognition through awards. And then I think it was Jacob and Blesson who talked about how these awards needn't only be for recognition at a big sort of scale, but also at an individual level. So if you go to Starbucks and you are rewarded for not using a plastic cup or for returning a plastic bottle, that works. So recognition and awards at multiple levels. And again, I would give a quick example from India. We have a big initiative in terms of ranking cities on their cleanliness index. And a lot of other initiatives didn't work, but when it sort of, when you started comparing and doing this public ranking of cities, it's suddenly making a lot of sense to a lot of city governments who are taking action and cleaning up their act. So those were some of the innovative solutions that we discussed. I'm sure there were several more, but pardon me for this sort of inexhaustive list.
Thank you so much. This was a very comprehensive summary. My immediate follow-up question to you would be, behavior economics is something really interesting, and I've always liked it because it somehow contradicts, that sort of classic assumption that we are sort of rational beings and we want to maximize, rent and utility. That all goes down the drain because it all seems that we are deeply emotional beings, and that, the color of a line on a letter or a dot at the right point, or whether we are being opted in or out, that this is a nudge which actually makes us take more sustainable or whatever decision. So the question is, are we sort of conscious beings? Can we make decisions based on sort of a conscious realization that, we have to adopt more sustainable lifestyles? Or is it this sort of, I say it now maybe a little bit provocative, playing with our minds, right? Just give us the right information, the right format, the right animal which we can associate, make a panda out of the elephant. So, we understand what the problem is. Is that which will nudge us and which will sort of bring us in the right direction?
So if I get the question right, you're saying whether we should leave it to people, give them enough information and leave it to them, or should we
The question is, do we have an agency ourselves to make decisions based on information, or is it all about nudging us to take on more sustainable lifestyles?
Right. So I think it's a mix of both. And actually there has been, if you read the literature and the sort of whole development of this nudge theory, it's come under a lot of criticism for this reason, that you are in some sense undermining the cognitive abilities of people, and in an indirect but structured manner influencing the choices that people make. So in some sense, you're restricting their freedom of choice. So to go back to your question, I think we take decisions, some decisions instinctively, where nudging will help, but we also take other decisions in a more thought out manner, where we will weigh the pros and cons and the costs and benefits, where I think our rationality is important. And it's, I think, important to, and I think that's also the whole premise of the nudge theory, is that you often, because there is a conflict between what you would decide instinctively vis-a-vis what you would do rationally, the nudges are designed so you move towards your best rational sort of decision. So yeah, it's a tricky one, but I think it's really a combination of both the left and right side of your brains that will finally decide or help you come to a decision.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, first of all, to all the panelists for their presentations. Now it's some time to interact with you in the audience. We have, can we maybe put up, could I ask colleagues maybe to put up the Slido app? We have so far only 3 questions. It seems that we have exhausted all the questions and that we have exhausted you, so please feel free to sort of add a few more questions. We have one question which was voted up already. Very interesting. If you had the power to make one policy change, ban or tax or whatever, with no questions asked, what would it be? Hong Sing, I pass that question to you because you've been dealing with the rules of the game session. So what would be that one policy change? So now I become the
policy maker.
Yes.
I make that one policy.
Please.
Ah, very interesting. Ah. If I had the power to make one policy change with no question asked, what would it be? Of course, the subject inclined on low carbon emission,
yes.
Right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Eat, live, breathe, green. Eat, live, breathe, green.
So you would make that the official policy?
Eat, live, breathe, green.
Perfect. Thank you.
One only.
Okay, we've got another question. I think that one is for Stephen. What would be the easiest green financial product to launch for ASEAN commercial banks?
Before I go there, I want to add my voice to King for a day.
Yes.
So if I was king for a day, I would price carbon. A price signal on carbon, because right now carbon is unpriced, and it takes a lot of guts to put a price onto carbon, but we will have continual emissions overspill until the price of carbon is reflected in our energy costs. So that's my one policy change. And I know there's a carbon leadership and so on, but I just wanted to share that. It goes with eat, breathe, live, green.
I approve.
Yeah, thank you.
I approve.
So, easiest green financial products to launch. I'm glad there's an S there because I think there are more than one. I mean, green bonds are really, really attractive, right? Because you're talking about a 30-year horizon. So, long-term investors, typically pension funds, typically municipalities are issuing them. It has, it's very, very easy, I think, for banks to begin underwriting green bonds. But I wouldn't stop there as well. I mean, I would think of green investment vehicles, that halo effect, right, that consumers are looking for. Why don't I put my money into a savings bank that I know is ethical and green and has a net positive impact with a good return?
Dirk, can I add something to this?
Absolutely, please.
Supporting this question.
Please.
Easiest green financial product to launch for ASEAN Commercial Bank. Actually, TMB, for the Thai people here, TMB Bank has a green bond that they offer loan at a very special rate for initiative or for companies who are working towards green. At the same time also, if there is a green initiative or the project that they are trying to loan the money for is working towards green, they get a very good rate. I'm promoting for TMB, sorry, I don't work for them.
Okay.
But there is such offering. And actually TMB is now owned by ING, and ING has a series of solutions in this area.
Okay, very good. Edwin, the next one is for you. Is it feasible all ASEAN countries just ban single-use plastic, including food wrappings, okay, that use fossil fuels as raw materials? What better nudge than this? Would that resonate with you, that type of nudge?
Well, it would with me, but I'm not sure it would be with my members. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's inconceivable that we can move towards an ASEAN-wide ban on single-use plastics. But at the same time, you know, we are always mindful that you do something, you don't displace another group of people, for example. And I know there's also talk out there about the considerations on the impact on food waste. Of course, there's some studies out there to say that actually packaging doesn't really contribute to prolonging the shelf life of food. But so the short answer is yes, it's possible. But then I would approach it with much more caution and obviously discussions with the stakeholders.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time, and I've got already some signs, so we have to slowly come to the end of this panel and wrap it up. That's why I want to actually recycle the last question here. What panelists will take from here, and how do you think value added from the, what is the value added of the discussion? I will sort of try to transform this question now, and I will give sort of each of you the chance to make a very short pitch. After this conference, I'll be traveling back to my duty station, Nairobi. I'm based in the UN Environment headquarters, and we are very busy there, preparing already for the fourth United Nations Environment Assembly. For the ones who don't know about this, this is basically the General Assembly for the environment. Every 2 years, we bring in all environment ministers of all countries in the world for 5 days to Nairobi, and they discuss, you know, issues of importance with regard to the environment and sustainable development. We usually get around 130, right? So not everybody can come, but we'll usually have around 130 environment ministers in one big plenary room. So if you would get the chance to be invited, right? But of course there are many, many speakers, you know, and the agenda is very compressed. And you would have 30 seconds, right, to send your one tweet, your one key message to those policymakers who sit in front of you. What would you tell them? Divya, we'll start with you.
I would say, you know, we need to give people affordable sustainability or sustainable options before we nudge them towards those options. So, you know, I mean, to give, this will exceed 30 seconds, I'm sorry. The explanation can exceed 30 seconds. The statement was within 30 seconds. So if you...
You are redefining the rules of the game.
Sorry. So, I mean, just to sort of give the example of public transport, you want to limit the use of private transport in developing countries, but if you don't have enough public transport options available, you can't nudge or shove people into buses. So it's important for public policy to consciously create those options by giving the right market signals through public procurement, etc., before nudging people towards those options. So in other words, and linked with that is the second point, is to align aspirations with incentives. And this sort of came out very strongly in our session. So align aspirations with incentives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know what they do in Nairobi during the Environment Assembly? All the national states, they have like 3 minutes for their national statement. And if they go over it, they turn off the microphone. because you know they don't manage. If you have like 130 countries make their national statements, they just cut you off. No worries. Thank you. Luis, your 30-second pitch to the global environmental policymakers.
All right, if you've ever sat in front of a policymaker for 30 seconds, you know that's a waste of your time. They don't pay attention to anything. But that said, let's assume it's one of the good ones.
I take your message there, so you'll be heard.
That's
30
off the
seconds.
record, whoever is recording this. All right, so 3 things I would say. The first one is sustainable lifestyles is an anchor point for citizens to get into the sustainability discourse and practice. Technology is a main driver and a potential solution, and we need guidelines on development and use of socially sensitive technologies.
Thank you. Edwin?
Well, I have a few. I think policy, they should look at it as a opportunity to guide, to incentivize, to advance. Also, to use it as an enabler and a facilitator. I would suggest a light touch to policy. And of course, the best ones are made when they are tailored to the specific condition of your country at the time of development. But at the same time, hopefully use a phased-in approach. And also, there's a good opportunity in this day and age to co-develop again with your stakeholders. And hopefully policymakers will look beyond tax and fiscal measures as the real impact or the real use of policy, but to see how they can use it to, like Louis was saying, how do you use it as an equalizer, whether it's for SMEs, for different stratas of society to get involved and to move ahead.
Thank you. Stephen?
30 seconds.
Yes, I count.
Okay, I know you would. My message, you are the custodians of this planet's wealth. Therefore, take your job seriously, number 1. And number 2, don't worry so much about growing GDP. Grow your wealth, measure your wealth, see how it's distributed, and make it count.
Wow, thank you. We are recording this, and we'll make sure we play it to the policymakers. Hong Sing, your chance now, 30 seconds.
Okay. Will you make the same decision, take the same action when you no longer wear this hat of yours?
Thank you very much. On that note, I'd like to thank all of you for this summary, and we will actually summarize your messages, and they will flow into a report, and it actually flows into the process of the preparations, and all member states and all those ministers I talked to, they will actually get access to your messages, right? So it's not just for this panel, you've just given a real message to at least 130 environment ministers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for a recap of our forum. And please kindly remain on the stage for some photo opportunities together. All of our moderators, thank you very much. Please kindly move forward for a photo group. Thank you very much indeed. And that was such a very comprehensive wrap up from each moderator from all of our panel discussions. Please kindly move forward. Thank you. Thank you very much. A round of applause for all of our moderators in the forum. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now we just have reached to the last session of the forum. May I again invite Ms. Isabel Luis Deputy Regional Director Asia and Pacific Region, UN Environment, to provide words of thanks to our participants. Thank you very much.
Okay. Right, good evening, everybody. I think we've come around to towards the end of what was a very enriching 2 days of discussions. I'm not going to go into detail and describe what we went through. I think we had a very good summary just now with all the moderators. But I think in conclusion, we can say that we're leaving this forum with a lot of ideas, inspiration, solutions, a lot of food for thought, and also what each of us can do going back in our different roles. As one of the moderators mentioned, end of the day, each country will have to adapt what is relevant to the country. But then overall, how we can harmonize and consolidate it. The Switch Asia program that UN Environment is working on regional policy, advocacy, is to provide knowledge platforms, networking, dialogue, on helping decision makers, partners, look at regulatory frameworks, best practices of policy, and the uptake of the Sustainable Development Goals. This 2 days was designed to bring those aspects of inputs and roles towards those 3 areas. It was also very interesting that out of those discussions have come out a lot of recommendations for innovation. Not just new ideas, but innovation is already out there. Behavior change is already out there. Changes businesses are doing, financial mechanisms, policy tools, innovative models. So we had a lot of things happening. So we hope that the forum provided all of you with a lot of opportunities that you can take and say, what can I take and what can I bring and who can I work with? Of course, for UN Environment, as you've been heard, this is a journey that we are taking towards the UN General Assembly, but we hope it's a journey that our partners here from the business, from governments will take on your journey as well, as you to actually implement the Sustainable Development Goals, and ultimately also affect and ensure that this region that's actually becoming one of the largest consumers and use of natural resources does not follow the practice of what the EU ambassador said, take, make, and waste. How can we come out with our own solutions to take and make, but not to waste? So I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the many people who contributed in various ways, from the planning, the preparation, the design, and to what we've come out today. First of all, I'd like to thank our partners and our hosts at CASEAN, led by Kunin and the management. We wouldn't be here with all this amazing backup and support without their commitment to sustainability and also working with us. So thank you very much to the CASEAN team. Thank you very much also to all the moderators, the speakers, and the participants, and the questions we saw on Slido were really good questions, so we'll make sure that we go into them as well as we go forward. So thank you to all of you. And the sessions, I think, would not have been really as so interactive if not for the good dynamics between the moderators and the speakers. I'd like to also thank the European Union for its long-term commitment to the whole effort to support this region in its efforts towards sustainable consumption and production, resource efficiency. This is a 10-year journey of the European Union. I think it's coming to a very exciting phase with all the different partners. So thank you again for their support. And finally, I'd like to thank the team of UN Environment who worked very hard behind the scenes, and also working with all our focal points from the various countries. We have a few more days to work with you, but we hope that this is a platform that takes forward all the ideas. This is not just going to be a workshop report that's going to be put in the files, but it's definitely going to be taken forward, not by us only, but hopefully with many of you going forward. So once again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. To those of us who are continuing with meetings the next few days, we look forward to working with you. To those who are leaving us, safe travels back, either here in Thailand or to other parts of the region. Thank you, and kapanka.